This week on Writers Inc.
I think that the querying process for this book was very different because I didn't have a specific subgenre. So I just said fantasy. And I'm going to tell you, it made it difficult for a lot of agents who saw it because they said, it's great. Where does it go in the bookshop? And I said, fantasy. And they said, are you sure? And I said, I am positive. It's like, I'm not so sure, so I'm going to pass. And I was just kind of like, okay, well, I mean, I know this is a problem, right? I wanted to write a fantasy novel. I wanted to have a mystery plot, and I wanted to have a romance plot, and I wanted to have a family drama. I wanted all of those things at once. And that I knew that was going to make it hard, but that is what I wanted. So I decided that I was going to give it a shot.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie on a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories. All have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers Inc.
Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
And JP Reinflush.
Kevin Tomlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers Inc. Two announcements to make before I forget. I am heading to Pittsburgh. First thing tomorrow morning, I'm hopping in the car and I am driving to PA. I'm going to be headlining at the Greater Pittsburgh Festival of Books on Saturday. So if anybody is in the Pittsburgh area, stop by and say hello. Secondly, I added to our robot army that I have here at the house. I got a robot lawnmower the other day.
That sounds wonderful.
I am very jealous of that.
It's cool and weird all at the same time. I've had them before, and the biggest problem with robot lawnmowers is you have to go around your yard and put down a boundary wire. You basically have to tell it where it can and can't go, which is why I just stopped getting them, because at some point the robot runs over that wire and breaks it, and you have to try and figure out where that break is. And if you've got a big yard, you're going, the wire is underground, it's buried, so you're like trying to find this break, and it just becomes this huge headache. So I gave up on them. But this one actually uses satellites. So you put an antenna up. It's supposed to mount it in your lawn, but I live in the middle of the woods, so I had to put it on the top of my house, which is a project all by itself. I kept going higher and higher and higher, trying to find a point where it would work. But once you get the antenna up, you just run the lawnmower around your yard and you control it with your phone, almost like an RC car. And once you do that, it creates a virtual boundary. Which works great in theory, but if the cloud, if you get a cloud in the sky or, anything at all to obstruct that view of the sky, it basically, gets dementia similar to my Astro robot, and just kind of goes off track. So I found it in flower beds and on the sidewalk, and it's out of the 5 days I've had it running, it's had 2 days where it actually successfully did everything it was supposed to. But I don't know, the entertainment value is there, and my lawn looks great when it is working. So I think I'll keep it around.
Does it have a name?
Obi-Mo Kenobi is what I have on there right now. That may change. Blade Runner is very popular too.
I really thought you were going with Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's actually better. I might have to change it.
That had the right rhythm.
What's going on with you guys? Anything exciting?
No.
as everybody shakes their head.
Hasn't been long enough for anything exciting to have happened since last week, I think.
All right. Well,
getting rained on my motorcycle. This is the most eventful thing in my week.
Riding a motorcycle in the rain it's a unique experience, if anything. Because first of all, it's crazy dangerous, because you can't see anything and you're being pelted by all this stuff and everything's slippery.
You don't have windshield wipers on the helmet.
And other people don't see you, which is what you really have to be careful of. But I've done that before on a long ride. It's kind of fun. We were talking about this before. Like if it rains, like a minute after it stops, you're dry again, and then it rains and you're wet again, and then you're dry again and you're wet again. But motorcycles, love them.
Yeah, I like it. I think I'll keep it.
I think we all need some caffeine this week.
Yeah.
we're getting in there. We're doing this one early.
We're doing it on we're actually recording on a Wednesday. We normally do Thursday. I think it's throwing everybody.
So
I guess I do
day
have
to
one
perk up.
tiny plug if you want. You can cut this if you don't. But I did start a Twitch stream on weekends for writing. So it's a co-working Twitch stream. I've been addicted to them, but the time that I go on, which is like 5:30 in the morning in Central Time, there just wasn't a lot of people. So if you're a writer out there who likes to write with another person, come check me out.
Interesting.
I have no idea what a Twitch stream is, so you have to explain this.
It's like a live stream. Twitch usually is used for like gaming, but the co-working and writing people have kind of started it. But basically, like, people play games and people watch them live stream the games, and they kind of just interact with chat. It's pretty popular.
And so people watch you write?
I don't have my screen up, but yeah, in general, they have like my face and they can see me writing. It's a lot like Zoom chats where people do the writing.
Okay.
It works for me.
So it's really just, it's like a JP cam, like in your office, right?
Yeah. Other people
like,
do
he's taking a drink.
screen
He's drinking a coffee. I think he's going to drink the coffee.
It's more the action of co-working and accountability, especially in like the virtual space.
And JP did a Twitch interview, which is, I think, maybe the first Twitch interview of an author that I have seen, but I haven't been around I'm sure the first one I have seen. I'm not saying the first one.
Okay. I was like, that's definitely not true.
I'm not around the Twitch space a lot, so it was fun. JP made the mistake of putting that in a Discord, so I showed up and harassed you in the comments while you were doing your interview.
Yep. Harassed me live during the interview. It was cool. I loved it.
That's the only way I would want to do that, though. I want
fun.
People who know me to pop in and try to distract me from my answers. That's what I want.
Yeah, I'm used to that with Christine and Serial Fiction Show. So it was fun to kind of do the live stream with the chat going.
All right.
That's cool.
Cool. How do people find it? Is there a link?
I can share a link and they can hop on, and because I have my gamer tag, so you'll know who I am.
All right, JP Cam is live.
Yeah.
All right, man. What's in the news?
All right, in the news, Amazon's new TikTok competitor called Inspire is now available to all U.S. customers. So Amazon launched this new short video and photo feature. It's called Inspired in the U.S., and it resembles TikTok in its format of endless feed and short vertical videos. However, this is more towards paying influencers to post content featuring products and a more direct path to purchase for users of Amazon Shopping mobile app. So influencers are getting paid with commissions rates ranging from 1% to 20%. But despite a promising start, Inspire is facing a bunch of competition with other social landscapes. So this is interesting. Basically a social media app that is all ads, more or less.
Yeah, it used to be you wanted gamification, and now everything's doing social mediaification.
I honestly thought it was like the silliest thing I ever heard when you sent that article over, and then I realized like the shopping channel has been on forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and people literally they turn that on as background noise, and they keep it going, and they dial all day long and buy that stuff. So I guess it could work. To me, it kind of felt like Betamax to Twitter or to TikTok's VHS. Like it's kind of there, but with shopping. I see where it's a fit. Who knows if it's going to be here in 6 months.
I actually think that the parallel to it being like TikTok is probably not quite accurate, because I don't think that's the audience that they're going to get.
Right.
I don't think that's who they're really aiming at. Yeah. It's just a convenient way to describe it.
Well, they've been kind of tooling around with this. If you use the Amazon app on your phone, like when you first load it up at the very top, there's at least on mine, there's like a video window of somebody pushing some type of product. And I don't know if they, if that stream is customized in some way. I mean, I guess they could probably do that. They could probably, like, if they know I look at electronics all the time, they could probably customize those feeds for me and things like that. Who knows?
I just saw something. AppSumo sent out a little list of things, their current things that are hot, and there's a app, and I don't remember what it's called, but what it will do is you can pre-record a video, or they even have some that are pre-recorded by like celebrities. But you can pre-record a video, and the AI will will customize it to the person. So like, someone's going to abandon their cart. Just before they click out, a video pops up and says, "Hey JD, I noticed you're about to abandon your cart. You might get a discount. Here's a special code just for you, JD Barker 10%." And it'll actually customize your face and voice are still there, but it just changes the name and the offer and those sorts of things per person.
I could see that. They're actually doing that now. I mean, if you don't use the wish list feature on the Amazon app, you definitely should, because virtually anything you throw in the wish list within a day or two, you're going to get some offer saying that it's on sale.
Yeah.
So it's an easy way to knock a 5-10% discount on something. Again, it's one of those things. Like I have zero interest in it, but I know there's people out there like that watch the shopping channel, people that will be into this. It's just a matter of, is that number going to be large enough to justify continuing it? And if you think about it from Amazon's standpoint, there's no real expenditure. They're putting all the burden on the people that are actually recording the videos and posting those videos. So it's no skin off their back to run it for a while and see if it goes.
Maybe we'll get like a Twitch-like feed of people's faces reading our books.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I want Nicolas Cage reading all my books moving forward. Everything, 100% Nicolas Cage television. I think that's what we really need.
Nick TV.
Nick TV 24/7.
You heard it here first. We'll take all proceeds. Next up in the news, Spotify tries to win indie authors by cutting audiobook feeds. So Spotify-owned Findaway will no longer charge a 20% royalty fee on titles sold on its Voices platform through Spotify. Traditionally, they used an 80-20 pricing structure, taking 20% of fee on royalties. However, this fee came after Sales Platform took their own 50% cut on the list price. This change is likely an effort by Spotify and find a way to attract more indie authors from their major competitor Audible, which currently dominates the audiobook market with an estimated 63% share.
Yeah, competition. This is awesome because I think we're finally going to see some pressure on the Audible side to reduce their fees based on this kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's needed, much needed. Breaking. I know that Findaway has had a long-term mission to sort of break the subscription model, because ultimately it's a bad model for everybody, including the readers. Like it's just not really the right way to handle that. But it's been such a huge part of Audible's offering that now people just sort of think of it as standard. But ultimately, you really don't want one of the problems with that model is that it encourages people to go for the longest book, the most expensive book they can, and never try any of the other books because you want to get the most you can for that credit you have. So that whole model spins out. So the readers aren't getting the kind of books that they probably want. They're not going to be exposed to anything new. And the authors basically, if you haven't written a tome, then you are not going to make much money.
Yeah, and it's a real barrier to entry for indie authors to have to put out like essentially a box set to shell out the money for that narration. So of course, anything that makes more money for indie authors is a good thing.
100%. Last up in the news, it's going to be a while, no end in sight for Hollywood strike. So the writer's strike has the potential to disrupt major industry events like the Emmys and the fall TV show season lineup, as the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers is ready to strike, and it could last for 100 days or more. Writers obviously are demanding higher residual payments, structural changes in business practices, and job securities. So I just kind of wanted to bring this up because I know that it's pretty much already here, and it looks like it's going to be here for a while. I know there was an article that George R. Martin had wrote about even the current structure with small writing groups is a struggle present day for junior writers to even get into that space. So it's just something that we'll probably be covering especially, and here's your drink time, when we talk about AI and the potential of how that could impact the strike as well.
Well, I'm getting hit on the other side. I got a whole bunch of these. This letter is from Lionsgate. So one of the things that's happening, if you have projects that are in the works in development or optioned, there's a clause buried in pretty much every contract, and it's a standard clause that allows the studio, the production company, all these different people that are involved in your project to hit the pause button the second the strike starts. So if you've got an option agreement with a studio and it's for, let's say, 18 months, they basically hit the pause button the date that strike started. And if the strike lasts for 6 months, lasts for a year or whatever, they don't have to pay you for that time. It's basically everything is on hold and those dates get shifted at the end. That doesn't necessarily mean work isn't happening on the project. I mean, in most cases, a lot of these things are grinding to a halt. But it's, this is an industry thing. And we're going to see the residual of that as viewers. I mean, right now there's a stockpile of, series and shows and things that have been produced. But we're going to hit the end of that. And, pretty soon you're going to hit that Netflix queue and you're going to realize there's nothing new popping up on there anymore. And same thing with the other ones. And then it's going to take a little bit, for that catch up to happen. We saw it even at the start of COVID, the same kind of thing happened that, the whole industry just kind of shut down for a little while until they figured out how to work around it. And I think 100 days is conservative right now. They're really far apart. And aside from hitting that pause button, they're also using this as an opportunity to shake out the projects they don't want anymore, because the strike allows a lot of studios to say, well, this option isn't working and we can cancel it because of the strike. And that's another clause in a lot of these contracts.
And here's the strategy that indie authors need to use. And that is, for the next 60 days, write as many things as you can and get them available for sale, and then start promoting them for the next 30 days, because in about 90 days, that's when people are going to run out of TV and they're going to start looking for books.
I saw a headline that Brandon Sanderson crossed the picket line and wrote 116 episodes of The Prestige, and I thought it was real for a minute until I realized it was The Onion. But I totally believe that. I was like, yeah, you could do that, no problem.
I could believe that. Yeah.
I've gotten burned by The Onion so many times.
This episode is brought to you by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. AutoCrit takes you far above standard grammar checking or cookie cutter guidance. Instead, it's like having an experienced editor in your genre watching over your shoulder to help you deliver great writing that keeps your audience trapped in the story. You can even compare your writing style to more than 100 best-selling authors right down to the word level, so you can see what the best in the business do to keep their storytelling clean, clear, and crisp. Listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can now take advantage of lifetime membership for one single fee. That's right, no renewal fees.
Hi, this is JD Barker. I've used AutoCrit for years, and not only has it improved my writing, but it's been a crucial tool with aspiring authors that I've mentored. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just beginning, it'll help you find your weak spots and weed them out. Give it a shot with your latest project. Trust me, your editor will thank you.
Head to autocrit.com/JD to get your lifetime membership. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show.
So, JD, who's up this week?
This week we've got C.L. Polk. She's the author of the World Fantasy Award-winning novel Witchmark. It's the first novel of the Kingston cycle. Her latest title was named one of the best romance novels of 2022 by the New York Times, and it is called Even Though I Knew the End. Here she is, C.L. Polk.
All right, so it has been nearly 2 years now, but how did it feel having LeVar Burton read one of your works?
Okay. So just the recording itself is absolutely spellbinding. It is so immersive to me. It is amazing to me that he got inside my head and he knows what everything looks like and he knows how everyone talks. And it's amazing to me. I talked to him in a Zoom chat for 15 minutes before he actually did the recording, because he wanted to ask clarifying questions. And he did have a couple of clarifying questions, but honestly, he wanted to know deep fan questions about the book. He wanted to know, he wanted to know if he was correct and that the characters in my book were Black Catholics. And I said yes, and he got excited, and it was just he kept asking me all of these questions that were just you're not asking these for how do you pronounce blah 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 blah. You are a fan, right, and you want to know secrets. And it was just Robert wants to know my secrets.
That is amazing. I love that so much. And that was for Saint Valentine, Saint Abigail, and Saint Brigid. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a totally 180-degree question, in previous interviews, I heard there was a point in your life where you had quit writing altogether. If you're willing to talk about it,
Yeah.
what was the catalyst that caused you to quit and what brought you back?
Anxiety, perfectionism, and one-upmanship. I tried to one-up myself all the time. I can tell you all about it in the if you want me to, because I think more writers need to know about this.
Please do. I would love to hear just a little bit about like what that process looked like, just because I think that it's important for people to kind of recognize that in themselves.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's not it's like a lot of the like hard and weepy parts of the story, but I mean ultimately I did go back to writing. I did return. It took me a really long time.
Mm-hmm. And you came back to writing through fan fiction, specifically supernatural TV
Yes.
show Alternate Universe. What was it about fan fiction that pulled you back into writing?
I think probably what it was dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is that I when you have a show like Supernatural and you have a bunch of viewers who are watching this show, but they are seeing a slightly or maybe drastically different story than the one that's actually on the screen, like something that's floating underneath it as subtext, or maybe it's just like there are multiple glimpses into like the multiverse where the things that they're seeing that are really subtle and they're like kind of pattern matching together are actually obvious and right there. So part of it was like that I just kind of wish that the subtext was not text.
Mm-hmm.
And like I wished it bad enough that I decided that I wanted to like kind of go into the fic thing. And I went specifically into the idea of like the alternate universe because I wanted to mesh in some of my interests and things that I wanted to know more about. And basically researching them for a story was a perfect excuse to rabbit hole like straight to heck. Something about me, I love to research. When people say, "Oh, I want to write fantasy because that means I don't have to research anything," I'm like, "What do you mean? What are you saying right now?" Because I love to do it. It's like if I have a question and I have an entire afternoon to chase down the answer that I wanted and maybe get an answer I didn't expect or a totally different thing, this is a beautiful day to me.
Yeah. And I definitely noticed that when reading Witchmark. And even though I knew the end, there's this ability you have with creating density in stories, but immersing the reader without burying them in exposition. And I'm just really curious, like, what is your process in laying that framework for your stories without being heavy-handed?
I need to know a lot. And in the case of even though I knew the end, because I made the decision that I was going to set it in as close to like real life our world historical Chicago as possible. I mean, barring the part where there are ceremonial magicians running around secretly running the world, I needed the details in order to make it real. Because what I do, like, I have noticed that like a lot of fantasy stories have a protagonist who is ignorant of the world that they are in or are about to enter, whether that's through the wardrobe into Narnia or because they are like going to warrior school or whatever it is. They walk into a world that is new to them, so they don't know it. So they need to have it explained to them. And conveniently, it's also explained to the reader. But in my books, I don't do that. My characters know perfectly well where they are. They know the history of the thing. They know the systems. They do not need to have them explained to them, and they cannot explain it to the reader. So I have to demonstrate that they know.
Mm-hmm.
I have to show them taking it entirely for granted, and in a way that like basically makes it experiential. Like, for example, Miles walks into the hospital and a bunch of people are sitting around listening to a radio. They're listening to a music show. Everybody, all readers know what a radio is. They know what a music show is on radio, and they can imagine a bunch of like veteran patients sitting in a semicircle around a radio listening to it. I don't need to explain any of this stuff. I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
I can just tell the reader what it is. And then it's like, well, how's it powered? Well, ether, obviously. We heard about that on page 1. And I can just continue on my way. So like a lot of the times what I'm doing in the books that I have published is that I'm dealing with a lot of stuff that I know that the reader is intimately familiar with. And so I don't have to explain it. I just have to present it in a context of this world so the reader can take what they know and figure out what it means for this place. And it's really easy, actually. And I'm glad that I just finally gave up trying to figure out how to make that like ignorant protagonist world needs to be explained, because I didn't want to do that. And so I thought I would try to do the opposite, and it worked. It worked out great. So if you're wondering how to do that, that's how I did that.
Mm-hmm. And when you're starting a new work, what would you say is that process to world building? Do you do all that work up front, or do you dig into topics as needed? As a writer, I'm just curious, like, how do you keep yourself in check from over world building?
So what I do is I decide and then verify. That's my system. I started with my world building the way a lot of people did with Patricia Reed's fantasy world building questions. There are many, many, many of them. They're so thorough. They're so incredible. I still keep them in my back pocket for when I feel like I am not like addressing a particular area of my world building thoroughly enough. The questions are always there to remind me what I forgot. But what I do is I decide and then verify. For example, I was in a chat room, I think it was today, and somebody said, how do you know how big your fantasy city is? And I said, I decide, and then I justify it. So
Mm-hmm.
if I decide that I'm dealing with a city of 10,000 people, bam, it's a city of 10,000 people. I'm the author. I have the power. All I have to do is make it make sense after that. So I know what I need to research in order to make that work. I know like how complicated it needs to be. I don't start with like, well, I'm gonna like invent an entire world and then I'm gonna find a purpose in it. I start with a very quick idea, and then I start building the world to suit the major decisions that I have made.
And then when you go to do that verifying process, is there any sort of like time restriction you have on that? I'm just thinking as a person with ADHD, I might be there for like 8 hours.
I have used timers actually. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's just a day burdened by the glorious purpose of looking things up. And I adore those days where I can just be like, you know what? I am not on a mission to find a specific piece of information. I am searching generally because I want to be surprised by the interesting and the unexpected. But I need to balance those with, okay, so in my work in progress, I am working with a fantasy city, a large one, because I love large fantasy cities. And I wanted high rises, but I didn't want the society to be able to do like steel girder construction. So I was like, is that possible? So I went and looked, and the answer is yes. It's very modern, however. It's skyscrapers using lumber. And then I was like, okay, how do they do it? Like, I'm going to look up how they do this. And I'm like, how do they do it? And the answer is that they do their own version of like MDF, where they take bamboo, they press it into sheets, and then they cross laminate it. So they take another sheet of bamboo and they run it perpendicular and so on and so forth. And then they glue them together and then they squish them down and then they cut them into beams, just like we do, except they use magic.
That's fascinating. I love it so much. You also write in historical fantasy where you're using historical elements. I'm curious, how do you go about balancing that historical accuracy with your storytelling? So, for example, I know that the headline, and even though I knew the end regarding Nixon's New Deal, it was a historically accurate headline, aligned down to the moon phase that you noted in the book. So I'm really just curious how you go about balancing that.
Well, with even though I knew the end, I did a lot of cleaving to the real details. Because the thing is that 1941 in Chicago is extremely well documented, and it's extremely well documented online. I barely had to go to the library for any of it. It's like all there. And so it was just me roaring around the internet, finding like historical research treasures, and then, finding secondary sources and original sources and who cited what and all of that other stuff. But it was all there just waiting for me. Multiple articles about, say, Marshall Field's department store on the corner of State and Washington, directly across the street from Helen's office in the Reliance building. I had like thousands of words of information on both of those buildings alone. Like there was so much material, and I read it all, and I had it all in my head, so that while I was writing Helen, who lived and breathed in these streets, I just let her remember what I remembered.
That makes such wonderful sense. So another topic, in one of your literary reviews for Witchmark, it was praised for its mashup of genres, calling it a soft sci-fi, vintage-style mystery, gay romance, vaguely steampunk with World War I culture and battle fatigue. Do you think the querying process was any different for a book like this?
I think that the querying process for this book was very different because I didn't have a specific subgenre that I could say. Like, I couldn't say it was a steampunk. I couldn't say it was like an urban fantasy. I couldn't say it was a fantasy mystery. So I just said fantasy. And I'm going to tell you, it made it difficult for a lot of agents who saw it because they said, it's great. Where does it go in the bookshelf? And I said, fantasy. And they said, are you sure? And I said, I am positive. It's like, I'm not so sure, so I'm going to pass. And I was just kind of like, okay, well, I mean, I know this is a problem, right? Because one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to write a fantasy novel. I wanted to have a mystery plot, and I wanted to have a romance plot, and I wanted to have a family drama. I wanted all of those things at once. And that I knew that was going to make it hard, but that is what I wanted. So I decided that I was going to give it a shot. And eventually I did find somebody who did, want the book. And much to my delight, people like this weird mashup thing I do. Like it's really fantastic. I love the fact, but I just say it's fantasy. And then I just kind of say shh to the rest. It's like, it's fantasy. Yes, I know there's other things, but mainly they're fantasy novels.
And that sort of add-in of those types of different genres is such a really good marketing standpoint. Like when you hear something like that on TikTok, like, check out this fantasy novel and it's XYZ, I feel like that really draws in attention. Do you see that when you do those sorts of marketing, or is that something that you're not privy to?
One of the things that I realize that it's a little bit, I don't know, it feels improbable, right? So when I tell people things like, even though I knew the end is a historical urban fantasy, occult, detective, lesbian pulp story, I'm kind of double dog daring them to read it. Because it's really outlandish to do that. And that was with that one review of Witchmark, it made me really happy to read it because that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to kind of put all this stuff together in one big pot and just like make a real hearty meal out of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I also noticed that you bring in the inclusion and to the forefront these social justice issues in your works, be it queer representation and what it feels like to experience homophobia, aspects of slavery and colonialism in Witchmark. I'm just curious, what drives you to bring these issues to light in your works?
A lot of the times what I'm doing is that these are the themes that I'm wrestling with. Like these are the things that I'm thinking about at the time that I'm writing the novel. Probably because I'm alarmed by them. One of the things that I noticed many years ago in reading William Gibson novels, because I read Neuromancer, of course, blew me away, and Count Zero, and Mona Lisa Overdrive, and the short story collection. And then Virtual Light came out and I read it and I was like, this isn't like Neuromancer. What's going on here? And then I realized William Gibson was writing about the 80s, but when he was writing Virtual Light, he was writing about the world that we were in at that time. He was writing about what he saw in the here and now, except that he was writing it by basically taking it to its like ultimate speculative like manifestation. And so I decided, well, I mean, if you can do that for science fiction, because once I noticed that it was happening, I saw it everywhere. I was like, why can't you do that for fantasy too? Because that was something that I heard a lot of people say about science fiction, is that science fiction is a mirror that like basically reflects our lives, our technology, what it is like to live in the modern age, and like what the heck is going on here. And that fantasy didn't do that. And I thought, well, I mean, it does. People do that. And I want to do it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I noticed that in the book, even though I knew the end, that women, if they have a talent for magic, they're often ignored unless their brother or father had that magic. This was definitely a nod to gender inequality, and it was so seamlessly stitched into the fabric of the story that I'm just curious, like how does the development of your story intertwine between the social injustices that you want to bring to light and the development of the story?
Well, the thing about, even though I knew the end, when I like, because the big scene, of course, is the asylum scene where I'm really like kind of taking these things like this historically typical sexism and the historically typical homophobia, and like really putting them up there like on the page, as it were, was in the context of the institution. And the thing is that like places like prisons and like insane asylums, these kinds of institutions are institutions of control. So this is a really great place to show how much power somebody has or doesn't have. So it makes it really stark, right? So when Helen sees her friend Harry, and like has that moment where she's like doesn't know what to do, and her friend sees her, smiles at her, shakes her head slightly to let her know that she is not going to recognize Helen, and then gets up and walks out of the room to let Helen know that she is safe there, that even though her friend is stuck in the institution, she's trapped there, she's going to protect Helen. And that act of resistance was very important to me about Helen's friend in the institution. And then again, when the psychiatrist is speaking to the witness that Helen wants to interview, and the doctor is not giving her information, he's patting her on the head. She's telling her that she doesn't actually need to understand anything about the medical procedure that he wants to do on her daughter, that she is just supposed to run along home and give this paper to her husband, who will actually make the decisions, because he's the one who actually has personhood. It's stark and it's horrible, and that's how it was. Women weren't legally people. They could vote and couldn't do anything else. And so like I had to write it that way because that was the very real danger of Helen being in that place during that scene. Those were the risks that she was running.
Absolutely.
And if they feel familiar to us today, I want everyone to think about that just for a minute, because I know what you're pointing at, and I see how far we've come, but I see how quickly we can slide all the way back to there if we do not pay attention and stay alert.
100%. So usually a last question we have for our interview is advice for new writers, but I want to turn this just a little bit. And I want to ask you, if I were a writer that wanted to incorporate more social justice into my work, what advice would you have for me?
The thing that I want to say is that I'm pretty sure that the last few years have taught us that a lot of the stuff that we thought was too extreme, too on the nose, too blatant, too ridiculous to put in a book maybe wasn't quite so much. So I want to say, like, don't be afraid to show what you see happening and what you want to stop, because I know a lot of people believed in a more reasonable world than we actually live in. So please don't be reasonable.
This episode is brought to you by Master Writer. Master Writer is a powerful collection of writing tools and references assembled in one easy-to-use program. Included are word families, phrases, synonyms, rhymes, definitions, figures of speech, pop culture, a searchable Bible of intensifiers, and a unique collection of intense descriptive words. Why struggle to find the right word when you can have all the possibilities in an instant? While a computer can't compete with the mind and imagination of a writer, the mind can't compete with the word choices that Master Writer will give you in an instant. When the two work together, great things happen. Check it out today at masterwriter.com.
So, I'm curious, have any of you ever mashed up genres, and what was your wildest genre mashup?
I mean, I feel like my book Evergreen is kind of a mashup of like thriller and paranormal / sci-fi, but that was kind of a complete accident. I wrote it at the point at which I was starting to write thrillers. And so I wanted it to have that vibe, but I was coming fresh off of writing sci-fi, and that was the book I wrote in a day. And so it was kind of experimental, but that's probably the only book I have that you could really clearly say is a kind of mashup. Yeah.
Well, a lot of this is still tied to the trad industry. You know, the second you talk to an agent, they need to figure out what box you belong to, so that they can tell the editor, this person is a horror author, they're this author, they're that author. And then the editor tells the marketing people that, and the marketing people tell the bookstore people that, and then they know what shelf to put you on once they finally get you to the bookstore. That's changed a little bit. I mean, even if you walk into a Barnes & Noble, there's basically a giant fiction section at this point. Yeah. And everybody's just in alphabetical order. But if you go in the mom and pop stores, there's still a romance, a sci-fi section, of this section, of that section. When I wrote Forsaken, it was a straight up horror novel as a first novel. And I realized walking into bookstores, that's one of the smallest sections actually in the bookstore. And there's a reason, that, like romance has 5 shelves and horror has, like one little spot in the corner. So I kind of shifted things, and started with my Wikipedia page. So now if you read that, it basically says I'm a suspense author, which may include elements of sci-fi, elements of horror, elements of romance, elements of that. So it basically allows me to kind of play in the different sandboxes, but still sticking to a particular genre as the main. Not as important if you're an indie author, except for, you need to know which categories to put yourself in on Amazon. I know tons of authors that they think that they're a particular category, and I'll read their book and I'm like, no, it's not that, it's this. You have to make sure you get that right, because with Amazon, there's nobody there to help you fix it.
Yeah. JD, what category is Death of the Black Widow? What's that in?
I think Jim asked me that same question. So here's the thing. So, like that's a Patterson book that I co-authored with him, for those of you that don't know. One of the reasons why he works with me is because he wanted to branch out into horror. He wanted to see if he could kind of go into that world and increase his audience based on it. So what we end up getting, if you look at the reviews, you really see this. We've got, the straight up thriller fans who get completely freaked out by the fact that this book has some type of supernatural element to it. Mm-hmm. And then they immediately put it down. Or you get the ones that say, this is the greatest Patterson book I've ever read, because it, for those exact same reasons, but it's different than his other ones. So they like it. Yeah. So it's kind of worked and kind of doesn't. For me personally, it's increased my audience tremendously, just, because I've, just being in Patterson's world like that, it allows me to do that. But the one we're working on now, it's a straight up thriller. I think we're kind of branching away from, trying to do that.
I feel like that book is kind of Dean Koontz-esque in some ways, not a little different, but, kind of, he writes stuff that is very similar. Or has written stuff that was very similar. But I have to tell you, man, that book is friggin' everywhere. Everywhere I go.
That's what I was going to say. I see it like it's at, it's in like CVS. It's in like.
Yeah, it does really well. It's just everywhere. The thing is, like his readers are just so used to a particular model. And, like I purposely, when I write these things with them, we go away from that model. He called me up in the middle of the Me Too movement. And he said, I think I want to write a book about a succubus, which is not an easy sell in that particular market. And this book, it basically starts off very, thriller-esque, and then it branches off into the supernatural. So if you're not expecting it, or you're not ready for it, it can be a little bit weird. It can be a little bit jarring. But I think for the most part, people do like it. In the end, it's the story. Like if they relate to the story, they're all good.
I do think that thriller makes for like a good genre to mash up with. I was just listening to another author, Sunya Dean, on her podcast talking about that she studied thrillers for a year and said, okay, can I write a fantasy that's more like a thriller? Yeah. And obviously that book did really well. So, I do think there is something to be said for studying other genres and seeing why they sell so well and what elements of that you can use in whatever genre you're writing.
Yeah, well, a lot of genres are very adjacent to each other, so if they're cousins and more or less, you can get away with it. Mm-hmm. I encourage almost everybody to get out there and read romance novels, because it doesn't matter if you're writing sci-fi or you're writing, a Western, if you can input some type of romance element to it, it's going to work. And Westerns in general, again, a lot of stories are Westerns, like, Blade Runner to me is a Western if you break it down into, the actual story. Just those particular elements, I think, are good from a writing standpoint to understand why they work and try to incorporate them.
Yeah. So JD, you had mentioned using a real world issue as kind of a jumping off point for one of your works. And I'm curious, so C.L. Polk, they really like to use social justice and real world issues in their writing. How do you guys approach integrating that or steering clear of that when you go about writing?
It's crazy tricky, to be honest with you. I mean, you have to make sure you don't come across as preachy in some way. So if you're going to introduce anything like that, it's basically got to be a character that's experiencing it, and it can't be over the top. I mean, I'm reading Holly right now, the new Stephen King book, and there's tons of Trump stuff in there, and like it doesn't need to be there. And he also wrote it in the middle of COVID, and it doesn't matter where you fall on all that stuff, but like just hearing, 6 foot distancing and wearing a mask, and this person doesn't have a mask on, like that just stresses me the fuck out. Yeah. It's got nothing to do with the story, but I don't want it in my head anymore. I'm very glad that we're beyond all that. So I would steer clear of that. It's a very tricky thing to do. You can be subtle about it and make sure it's necessary to the story if you're going to put it in there.
What I thought was interesting was what C said, because it's very typical of sci-fi to tell the truth about now using, futuristic setting or aliens or whatever the author's version of the truth is, right? What their perspective is on the issues that are going on now, and to take those on pretty head on and boldly. So, I guess I haven't thought about it or maybe noticed it as much as fantasy as I have in sci-fi, but I think I'm seeing more of that. So, it was interesting. I was like, well, why not take it head on in fantasy? So I've been pondering that a lot since I listened to that. I'm going to digest that and think on that some more.
Definitely. So another thing with Seal Polk is they really love world building. I was super fascinated with this and just how deep in a rabbit hole they can go. How do you guys include like historical accuracy or research in your writing process?
I personally try to avoid it as much as possible because to me that equals research and research equals work. I'd rather just make shit up. But, again, you have to be careful there, too. Like the book I'm working on right now, it centers around a particular building in New York that's a real building that has a real history. And I have to be very careful as far as accuracy there because almost every New Yorker knows this particular building. So if I describe it slightly different from the reality of it, I'm going to hear about it. And again, that would take readers out of the story, which is, the last thing you ever want to do. So, I mean, you can go down that rabbit hole. You just have to make sure you do your homework.
I always kind of start with actual facts and history and then quickly give myself an out and veer into like pure speculative fiction and fantasy. Like, I wrote about one of my books. I wrote about the Thomas Edison's labs burning down and how he, stood there and watched them burn and had his son go get his wife and everything. Like, you're never going to see anything like this again. Everything about that scene was historically accurate. But then once that part played out, I threw in a few details that, you didn't know. And then that became the basis of the story. So there was, that factual element that I treated with, that kind of respect. And then I went far left and just, ran with it. So that's the way I handle most of those things.
And I love it. I love it when books do like that and where it's so like historically accurate. You think that the fictional parts could be true.
Yeah.
I remember there was a story, I think it was called like Abe Lincoln Vampire Hunter or something like that. And I had read it and my mom called me and she's like, do you think this actually happened? And I'm like, no, Mom, I don't think Abe Lincoln was actually a vampire hunter. But she was like so convinced by the historical accuracy. And I'm like, that's really what you want to do as a writer. That's like goals right there.
What kind of freaks me out is how very often I will get reviews or emails from people talking about how they never knew this, but they looked it up and it turns out that it's true. And I'm like, really? Because I completely made that up. I have no idea how I got anywhere near the truth on that.
Very nice.
We did the flip of that with Dracul. We took every factual thing we could find on Bram Stoker and we tried to squeeze it in the book and mashed it up with enough fiction where you can't tell the difference anymore. And honestly, like some of the most outlandish things in the book were true.
Yeah.
And, so if you jump on Google and you look them up, you will actually find them and realize that's a real moment. And that can be fun too.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Okay. So JD, who's up next week?
Next week, we've got Kate White. She's the New York Times bestselling author of 9 psychological thrillers, including Between Two Strangers and The Secrets You Keep. Her latest is called Between Two Strangers, and it releases May 16th. So, Kate White.
Awesome. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Do you want to write crime stories that are accurate and believable, but lack first-hand experience in law enforcement? Join Cop Camp, the Cops and Writers interactive conference, and experience what real-life police officers and detectives do through hands-on activities this June 1st through the 4th at the Fox Valley Police Academy in Appleton, Wisconsin. Limited class size of 30 to 40 students ensures an immersive, interactive experience. Attend firearm simulations, drive a squad car, solve mock crime scenes, and use real CSI tools, and more. Register now at premeditatedfiction.com/CopCamp 2023 and take your crime writing to the next level.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.